Are there any particular research findings or strategies that you've developed regarding cognitive behavioral treatments for anxiety, depression, or borderline personality disorder?
Yeah, yeah. So, I'm at the University of Kentucky now, but I used to work at Boston University, and when I was there, I helped develop a treatment called the Unified Protocol, which, in my opinion, is not a very good name because it doesn't really sell. But the idea is like it's a unified protocol. It's one treatment that can simultaneously address neuroticism. And so that means anxiety disorders, depression, eating disorders, BPD. Now at the University of Kentucky, so working with people with borderline personality disorder is kind of my home base. I've worked with those folks like all through graduate school. And so, when I was applying the unified protocol, I wanted to test it with people with borderline personality disorder. And I found that for BPD, the unified protocol worked really well for some patients, but for other people, like it really didn't seem to make a bit of difference. And like being the like clinical scientist that I am, I'm like, well, why? um, and so one of the things that's really interesting about BPD is that, in the DSM, like our big book of like symptoms, there's 9 symptoms of BPD and you need 5 of them to get the diagnosis. And what that means is that there are 256 different combinations of those symptoms that can like lead to a BPD diagnosis. And so two people with that same diagnosis can actually share only one symptom in common. So they can look really different. So there's like emotional dysregulation. So being like really up and down in mood, it's kind of like moodiness, and inappropriate anger. So that's like the emotion side. Then there's what they call like behavioral dysregulation, and so that looks like self injury, and then it also looks like any kind of impulsive thing that you can think of that takes my mind off of the distress I'm feeling. So it could be risky sex, it could be substance use, it could be binge eating, it could be like overspending, like things that most of us do to like some degree. Like I know, like, oh, I've had a bad day, I deserve to buy those shoes I've been looking at, right? Like most of us do that to a degree. It's just like more extreme in folks with BPD. And then the other really key kind of symptom area is interpersonal distress. So a lot of conflict in relationships. And then the other really like key symptom is fear of abandonment. So like really difficult time tolerating separation from a loved one, or it can look the opposite where it's like I just like don't engage with relationships because I don't want to get hurt. So what we find is that these symptoms can so part of the reason that the unified protocol, like the neuroticism treatment, worked really well for some people is for some people these symptoms come from experiencing really intense negative emotions and like wanting to avoid them. And so a treatment that targets avoidance of negative emotions works really well. But for some people, their behaviors and their symptoms kind of come from other risk factors. So if people are kind of high in that antagonism, so like low agreeableness, have a lot of trouble with trust, a neuroticism treatment for emotions isn't going to address that. Like you need a module or you need skills that are addressing like trust and relationships and like how people kind of interact with other people. And then some people engage, say, like in those some of those behavioral symptoms, not because they are trying to escape negative emotions, but because it feels good. And that's that disinhibition or low conscientiousness. So as you see the example of using substances, some people use substances because they had a bad day and now I'm going to drink like 3 glasses of wine so that I like get that negative reinforcement so that I don't have to feel that anymore. Some people drink or use substances again because it like feels good to be high. And if you're using because you're impulsive, a treatment for dealing with negative emotions isn't going to address your substance use. Knowing that BPD is really variable, my lab developed a treatment, we call it BPD Compass. And Compass like is a very loose acronym for cognitive behavioral modules for personality symptoms. And so basically, we have a module for neuroticism, a module for antagonism or low agreeableness, and a module for disinhibition. And right now, I mean, I guess we developed it in the summer of 2020, which in hindsight, I'm like, how did we do that? Because it was a time. But we developed it in 2020, and now we've tested it with over 100 people with borderline personality disorder. And at this point, we've given like all three personality modules to everybody. So it's 18 sessions long. And we see large reductions in BPD symptoms. So people are getting relief from their condition. And we see big changes in neuroticism and kind of like medium-sized changes in antagonism and small but significant changes in disinhibition.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, we're like so excited about it because most treatments for BPD are over a year long, and that's like, you know, kind of rewind to like there aren't enough providers, and you sit on a wait list, and it's hard to find people with the expertise that you need. We also wanted to develop a short-term treatment, so we're thrilled that we can see that important change so quickly. And we're like waiting for like what's called a notice of award, but basically funding from the National Institute of Mental Health to give us like millions of dollars to test the personalized version.
Very cool. Amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
What role does the subconscious mind play into all of these traits?
That's a great question, and one that is like would be really challenging for me to answer. So, in my training, like, so the subconscious mind is like more like would be like more like psychodynamic psychology for better, well, definitely for worse, probably like people that are practicing cognitive behavioral therapy and people that are doing more like psychodynamic treatment, like, do not really like go to the same conferences, read the same articles. So, like, I feel like if I describe the subconscious mind, I will mess up, so I won't. But I think that's, like, a failing with our system because, like, ultimately, the goal is to, like, find the best treatment for people, not, like, be right about your theoretical orientation. We take the beliefs that we have, and we try to, like, make it explicit, like, not subconscious. We try to, like, make it overt, right? So, like, were there messages that, like, you got from your parents that sort of suggested that, like, only, like, an A plus or a 100 was, like, success? That's, like, another so, like, perfectionism is, like, you would ask, like, what are so challenges, right? And so people that are, like, anxious perfectionists, get a lot of, like, external reward for being that way. "Oh, she responds to emails so fast," like, "Oh, like, we can always count on her." And so it is extremely scary to make those small changes, it can be, because you're, like, afraid, "Well, if I don't do it perfect, will, like, people I don't know, will people say something to me? Like, will I get in trouble? Will I not be respected in the same way?" And you don't know. One of the things I always tell my patients is that, like, again, like, successful academic, associate professor, I have tenure. I failed math, like, and had to repeat it in high school. And while that was, like, so embarrassing and, like, terrible at the time, I think that it really helped me because if you've never failed, you never you don't get to learn that, like, it sucks for, like, a little while and then it's, like, fine.
Right. I think that also goes in the role of parenting as well. It's like when you want to protect your kid so much to the point when they're adult on their own, they have no idea what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we can develop our sort of beliefs about the way the world works. We get those messages from people around us. And when we're kids, like, that's a place that um our parents or our caregivers are the people we're spending the most time with. And so, we get messages about performance, right? Like that you can of course contribute to sort of like this perfectionistic, like high, almost to the point of like causing problems for us, conscientiousness, right? Where I see so neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions, that one is probably like more biological than maybe some of the others, but there's definitely an interaction with with parenting. And what we find is because, well, like, kids that are pretty emotionally expressive, like, often parents will be like, it's not a big deal, it's okay. And so they're not meaning to do it, but they might give like what are like invalidating messages, like, oh, that's not a big deal, it's not something to be upset about, which seems like, I mean, I'm a psychologist and I still sometimes say that stuff to my kid, right? Instead of being like, I mean, it sounds pretty benign, but instead of being like, oh gosh, I understand why you're feeling that way. Like, let's think this through, like more sort of validating their emotional response. And of course, like that, like, it's not a big deal can be like, don't be a baby, don't cry about it, all the way to just like, go to your room. I'm not going to deal with this, right? So when when kids get messages that like they should be able to turn their emotions off really quickly or that their reactions are not valid, they develop these beliefs that like it's bad to feel. And when people have the belief that it's bad to feel, they avoid. And what we know is that avoidance is a really big symptom of anxiety, depression. Psychology, just like any field, is like so niche. But basically, like those attachment styles typically, like, or the way that they were sort of like first studied was actually in developmental psychology. So people that study kids and try to understand. And the first, I'm like having a blank on the like researchers' names, but the first like kind of coining of those like attachment styles was actually looking at kids from London who were like separated from their parents during World War II and like brought into the country so that they basically wouldn't get like bombed. And so that's like sort of where those attachment styles developed. Other studies they'll do, they call it the strange situation study. And so basically like a mom, it's always the moms because like all these studies were done in like, I don't know, like the 70s. So like who was taking their toddlers to to experiment. So it's always the mom. But the moms would like bring their kid into the like research room and like play with the kid, and then the mom would leave and a stranger would come in, and there were all these different like iterations of it. And basically they would observe like what the kid would do when the mom would leave, and they would categorize people into these different attachment styles. And I think that like the attachment style piece, right? Like I think it sort of fits with kind of neuroticism, right? Tendency to experience negative emotions. And then it also like kind of connects with that antagonism or trust piece. Um, and I mean, so in our studies, we measure attachment, like there are questionnaires for it. So we measure it and see if like in our treatment with BPD, like if people are get like improving their attachment styles. But all the research suggests that that's also not set in stone. If you're like anxious avoidant right now, you can have restorative relationships. I mean, I think about like so like I grew up in a situation like where I had a single parent, my mom, and she was like always there. She was like a rock, but my dad like kind of pieced out when I was little. And I think it might have caused some trust issues, probably. But I think about like my husband who is like just a person who is like, okay, I'll be there at noon and is like there at noon.
That's very fascinating because I know there's this trend of attachment theory going around.
Mhm.
So I was very interested in hearing about that. Hey guys, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our app, Yoga Plus. You will have access to an incredible selection of videos led by top instructors in yoga, fitness, nutrition, and so much more. Download our Yoga Plus app available on iOS and Android today.